Her life was a secret stitched with pain. By day, Isolde was a ghost, a whisper of a girl who haunted the edges of the Black Moon Pack. She moved through the bustling settlement like a shadow, her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the dirt path because looking up was a luxury she couldn't afford. She scrubbed pots until her knuckles were raw, mended tunics with fingers that ached, and fetched water from the well, all in a bubble of suffocating silence. No one spoke to her, and she offered nothing in return. Still, every beat of her heart was a prayer for night to fall. Maybe it was a sickness, this craving for the one who broke her. Deep down, she knew the truth. She didn't long for the night. She longed for him. Kale, the beta of their pack, her secret mate, her tormentor. The scent of pine and cold stone clung to the air near his quarters, a scent that should have warned her away. Instead, she breathed it in. It was the only part of him she was allowed to have in the daylight. Moments later, the sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in angry strokes of orange and purple. The day was ending, and her real life was about to begin. The familiar knot of dread and desperate hope tightened in her stomach. Would he be kind tonight? Or would he need to punish her for a crime she didn't know she'd committed? No matter how hard she tried to prepare herself, the answer was always a surprise. Her world tilted with every sunset, and she let it happen. That night, she slipped through the shadows, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. Kale's door was never locked for her. The heavy wood swung inward without a sound, and she closed it behind her, plunging the world into darkness. The space between them burned before her eyes even adjusted. His scent was stronger here. Pine, yes, but also the sharp, metallic tang of power and something else. Something like coiled rage. "You're late." His voice cut through the gloom, low and sharp. He wasn't across the room. He was right there. Her breath caught. Before she could move, his hand clamped around her arm, his grip like iron. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? An extra minute of gossip with the other bitches at the well?" "No," her voice trembled, barely a whisper. "The elders, they needed more firewood." "Excuses." He shoved her toward the center of the room, and she stumbled, catching herself on a heavy wooden table. His form was a silhouette against the single moonlit window. Tall, powerful, everything a beta should be. And he was hers. This was the story she told herself. Because of that, the pain was worth it. The cruelty was just a test of her love. Wasn't it? In that moment, he lit a single candle. The flame bloomed to life, casting flickering shadows that danced between them. His face was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, his dark eyes holding no warmth. "I saw you today." Her heart skipped. Hope, that stupid, stubborn weed, pushed through the cracks in her fear. "You did?" "You were looking at me," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "In the main square. You looked at me for too long." To make things worse, she realized her crime. She had been invisible to everyone except for him. He saw her, and he hated her for it. As a result, the punishment would be worse. "Kyle, Without another word, he crossed the space between them. "Do you have any idea what would happen if the Alpha saw that? If he sensed the bond you so carelessly flaunt?" He grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were wild with a fear she could never quite understand. It was more than just fear of losing his rank. It was something deeper, something primal. "He would strip me of my title. He would cast me out. Is that what you want? To ruin me with your weakness?" "No, never," she choked out, tears stinging her eyes. "Then you will learn," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "You will learn to be nothing, a ghost. You will not look at me. You will not speak my name. You exist for me only in this room, in the dark. Do you understand?" She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. and she let it happen. His hands were cruel, his words were colder, but this was the price. It had to be. In the quiet that followed, after the anger had faded into a cold, possessive claiming, she lay there, listening to his breathing. Her bones remembered him in a way her mind couldn't comprehend. Before the first hint of dawn, he pushed her away. "Get out, and tonight is the moon feast. The Alpha King is visiting for the treaty." His voice was urgent, laced with that same strange fear. "Don't you dare even breathe in my direction, Isolde. Don't exist." His words were a brand, and as she slipped back into the cold pre-dawn gray, she knew her purpose: to not exist. For him. The moon feast was a roaring bonfire of sound and scent. The entire pack was alive, their laughter and chatter rising into the night sky with the sparks from the massive central fire. The air, thick with the smell of roasting boar and spiced wine, made Isolde's empty stomach clench. She watched from the deepest shadows at the edge of the clearing, a ghost, just as he'd commanded. Her plain, rough-spun tunic felt like sandpaper against her skin, especially when she saw the other she-wolves in their finer clothes, their hair braided with ribbons. Then, a hush fell over the crowd. As if pulled by a string, every head turned toward the main path. He arrived not with a thunderous announcement, but with a presence that simply demanded silence. The Alpha King, Theron. He was even larger than the stories claimed, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of all the packs. His hair was the color of midnight, and even from this distance, she felt the sheer, crushing weight of his power. It was nothing like Cale's angry, desperate authority. This was ancient, absolute. His eyes swept over the crowd, and for a terrifying second, she felt as if he could see her, even in her hiding place. Her wolf pressed forward inside her, not in submission, but in curiosity? She shoved the feeling down. But then her own world tilted. She saw Cale. He was standing near the Alpha's favored circle, not looking at the king, but at someone else. A beautiful, high-ranking she-wolf named Lyra. He was smiling at her. A real smile, the kind Isolde had only dreamed of receiving. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh, a bright tinkling sound that felt like shards of glass in Isolde's chest. He wasn't pretending. Her heart didn't just break, it seemed to dissolve. The pain was so sharp, so sudden, that her breath caught in a choked gasp. All the punishments, all the silent suffering. What was it for if he could look at another like that? Deep down, she knew the truth. It was all a lie. Her love, his protection. All of it. As if fate demanded it, the Pack Alpha stepped onto a raised platform, calling for silence. "Tonight we celebrate the moon, we celebrate our pack, and we uphold tradition." His voice boomed. A sick feeling coiled in Isolde's gut. She knew what came next. It was a cruel part of the feast she'd always ignored, the public settling of slights, the formal rejections. Before she could even think to run, to melt back into the forest, the Alpha said the name that stopped her heart. "Beta Cale has a claim to settle," the crowd murmured with excitement. Isolde watched in horror as Cale separated from Lyra, not with reluctance, but with a cruel, confident smirk on his face. He scanned the crowd, his eyes passing right over her. No, not passing over her. They were searching for her. The moment their eyes locked, she knew. This wasn't a punishment. This was an execution. And her whole world was about to burn. Her world didn't just tilt, it shattered into a million pieces. Before she could move, before she could even process the cold dread flooding her veins, Cale was striding toward her. He moved with the predatory grace of a hunter cornering his prey. The crowd parted for him, their curious, hungry eyes following his every step. Her body moved on instinct, trying to shrink back further into the shadows, to become the ghost he'd always wanted her to be. But there was nowhere left to run. Without warning, his hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. It wasn't a lover's touch. It was the grip of a jailer. He yanked her forward, and she stumbled out of the darkness and into the unforgiving firelight. Gasps and whispers rippled through the pack. Her secret was out. Their secret. And the look on his face told her this was no accident. In fact, this was his plan all along. He dragged her to the center of the clearing, right before the Alpha's platform. He was strong, so much stronger than her, and she felt like a rag doll in his grasp. Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her throat, a wild bird trapped in a cage of ribs. She didn't dare look at the faces in the crowd, the jeering smiles, the looks of pity. Instead, she stared at the dirt, her world shrinking to the space right beneath her feet. "Behold!" Cale's voice boomed, filled with a theatrical disgust that made her skin crawl. He shoved her forward and she fell to her knees. This shadow has been clinging to my steps, whispering of bonds and fate where there are none." A wave of laughter rolled through the crowd. Each laugh was a physical blow. Truth be told, she didn't know what scared her more, the pack's scorn, or the cold, dead emptiness in Cale's eyes. This was the man she had bled for, the man she had suffered for in silence, and he was serving her up for sport. She is a low-born nobody, unworthy of even cleaning the boots of a beta's true mate. He gestured grandly toward Lyra, who looked both shocked and smug. "I, Kyle, beta of the Black Moon Pack, reject this pathetic creature. She is nothing to me. She was never anything to me." The finality of his words hit her harder than any physical punishment ever had. Nothing. All those nights, all that pain, it was all for nothing. The world went silent, the roaring fire and the laughing voices fading into a distant hum. Her chest ached with a pressure so immense she thought it might crack open. She was broken, utterly and completely broken, kneeling in the dirt for everyone to see. But then a new voice cut through the haze, a voice that carried a weight she had never heard before. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a shout, yet it silenced the entire clearing in a single heartbeat. "She is not yours to reject."
Theron had been watching the pathetic display with a kind of weary boredom. These local customs were often brutish, designed to reinforce power through humiliation. He'd come for a political treaty, a necessary but tedious affair, not to watch some arrogant beta puff out his chest while breaking a poor girl. He'd seen 1,000 men like Cale in his courts, men whose ambition far outstripped their honor. They were a tiresome breed. He'd noticed the girl earlier, a flicker of misery in the shadows. He'd dismissed her. But when the beta dragged her into the light, Theron felt an unexpected jolt, not of pity, but of something else. Something tugged at him, a strange resonance he couldn't name. Then the beta, Kyle, spoke his rejection, and in that moment, Theron felt it. It wasn't just the girl's pain, though it washed over him in a wave of pure, silent agony that was so profound it made his own wolf stir. No, beneath the pain there was something else. A thrum. A deep, dormant well of power that hummed in a frequency only he could seem to hear. It felt ancient, wild, and achingly familiar. His entire purpose for this visit, the tedious treaty, and the political posturing suddenly felt meaningless. What was this? His advisors would call him a fool. They would say he was ruled by impulse. They were wrong. He was ruled by instinct, the same instinct that had kept him on the throne for a decade, and his instincts were screaming at him. Without another thought, he stepped forward. The crowd parted before him like water. His gaze wasn't on the shocked pack alpha or the stunned, furious beta. His eyes were locked on the girl. Isolde. Her name hung in the air, a name Kyle had spat like a curse. Under the weight of his stare, she looked up, her eyes wide with a despair so complete it stole his breath, and in them, he saw the faint, shimmering echo of the truth. A true faded mark buried and scarred over. But there. "She is not yours to reject," he repeated, his voice calm but absolute. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The air thickened with unspoken challenges. Kyle finally found his voice, sputtering with rage. "Your Majesty, this is a pack matter, a tradition. She is mine," Theron finished. The word echoed in the sudden, dead quiet. He let the claim settle, watching it shatter the pack's rigid order. He saw the confusion, the outrage, the dawning fear. He had just taken their trash and declared it his treasure. Not only that, he'd done it because he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that she was infinitely more valuable than any wolf in this clearing, including himself. Because of that, he would burn his own court to the ground before he let them harm her. He held out a hand to her. "Get up." The moment their eyes locked, something inside him shifted. A bond, ancient and powerful, pulsed to life. And he knew, in that single heartbeat, that the world had just changed.
Mine. The word hung in the air, impossible and terrifying. Isolde stared up at the Alpha King, her thoughts spinning into chaos. Her mind couldn't catch up to what was happening. One moment, she was nothing, a rejected toy thrown in the mud. The next, she was his? It didn't make sense. As if pulled by a string, her gaze flickered to Cale. His face was a mask of pure, murderous rage. His humiliation was complete. The woman he'd declared worthless was just claimed by the most powerful alpha in the world. His knuckles were white where his fists were clenched. The look in his eyes promised a pain far worse than anything she had ever known. Theron's hand was still outstretched. It was a large hand, calloused but steady. She didn't know what scared her more, staying where she was, at Cale's mercy, or taking the hand of the stranger who held the power of life and death. With every heartbeat, the tension grew. Before either could speak again, Theron gestured to the two guards at his side, figures clad in black leather and silver sigils. "Take her to my quarters. See that she is cleaned and attended to. Now." It wasn't a request. It was an unbreakable command. The guards moved instantly. One moment Isolde was on her knees in the dirt, the next she was being lifted to her feet, a strong but impersonal hand on each of her arms. She was being led away, the stunned faces of her pack blurring as she passed. She heard Cale shout something, a furious, choked sound, but the king's voice cut him off with a low growl. The world was a dizzying mess of firelight and shadows. Her feet barely touched the ground. They swept her past the celebration, away from the life she knew, a life of silent pain and secret shame. What followed was a blur of ornate tents and unfamiliar paths. There was no kindness in the guard's touch, only efficiency. She was cargo, a prize, a problem. Eventually, they stopped before the largest pavilion, its silk walls glowing from the light within. They pushed her through the flap and then closed it behind her, leaving her alone. The silence roared in her ears. She stood, trembling, in the middle of a space more luxurious than any she had ever seen. Rich furs covered the floor. A soft bed was piled high with silk cushions, and a small table held a basin of steaming water. It was a beautiful cage, but it was still a cage. She wrapped her arms around herself, the ghost of Cale's rejection and the king's impossible claim warring inside her. She had been saved from one monster only to be handed to another, more powerful one. Hadn't she? Her breath caught in a sob. In a single night, she had lost everything she thought she wanted, only to be trapped in a new reality she couldn't possibly understand. And deep down, she knew the truth. Her ordeal wasn't over. It had just begun. In the quiet that followed, the silence in the opulent tent was a living thing. It was heavier than any shout, deeper than any threat. Isolde stood trembling in the center of the furs, her arms wrapped around herself as if to hold her splintering soul together. The air smelled of beeswax and expensive oils, a clean, cloying scent so different from the cold stone and stale anger of Cale's quarters. This place was warm, comfortable, and because of that, it was 100 times more terrifying. She didn't know the rules here. Moments later, the tent flap swished open and two women entered. They weren't guards. They were servants, their faces polite, impassive masks. One carried a wooden basin steaming with scented water, and the other held a pile of soft, folded cloth. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct. She flinched back, a small choked sound escaping her lips. She expected a blow, a harsh word for being in the way. Instead, the older woman simply paused, her expression unreadable. "Your Majesty has commanded that you be made comfortable," she said, her voice a low, even murmur. Comfortable. The word was so foreign it felt like a slap. What followed was a strange, gentle torture. They did not hurt her. Their hands were soft as they helped her out of her rough, dirt-stained tunic. They washed the grime from her skin with warm water that smelled of lavender, their touches impersonal yet careful. Every gentle stroke made her want to scream because she kept waiting for the kindness to curdle into cruelty. She kept waiting for the catch, but it never came. To make things worse, they led her to a polished silver mirror. She stared at the reflection, and for a heartbeat, she didn't recognize the person looking back. The girl in the mirror was pale and thin, with eyes that were far too big for her face, eyes that held the haunted look of a cornered animal. Her dark hair, now clean, fell in damp waves around her shoulders. They dressed her in a simple, deep blue shift made of a fabric so soft, it felt like moonlight against her skin. She looked clean. She looked like someone else, and she hated it. The dirt and the rough clothes had been her armor, a sign of her place in the world. This was a costume, a disguise for whatever game the Alpha King was playing. Just as the servants were about to leave, the tent flap opened again. A different woman stood there this time. She was tall, regal, with silver hair pulled back in an intricate braid. Her eyes were chips of ice, and they scanned Isolde from head to toe with an expression of open disdain. "The king will see you now," the woman said, her voice clipped and cold. "Do not speak unless you are spoken to. Do not touch anything. You are here by his whim. Remember that." The woman's message was clear. Isolde wasn't a guest. She was a stray dog the king had brought inside, and everyone was just waiting for him to grow tired of her and throw her back out into the storm. And deep down, she knew the truth. A storm was coming. Kale would make sure of it.
The moment he stepped back into his command tent, the storm had already broken. His chief advisors, two older, grim-faced wolves named Valerius and Cassian, were waiting for him. Their faces were etched with a disapproval so profound, it was almost comical. "You cannot be serious, Your Majesty," Valerius began, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. "To claim a rejected commoner, in front of the entire pack, you have mortally insulted Alpha Marcus and his beta. The treaty is now all but dead." "Worse than that," Cassian added, pacing like a caged lion. "The court will hear of this. They already question your impulses. This makes you look weak, Theron. Ruled by base urges, not by royal duty. They will say you have been bewitched by a low-born whore." Theron let their words wash over him, his expression unreadable. He walked to a large map table, resting his hands on the cool wood. He understood their fear because it was rooted in logic and politics. They saw a chessboard, and he had just flipped the entire board over for a single, seemingly insignificant pawn. But they couldn't feel what he had felt. They hadn't heard the hum of her hidden power or seen the faint, scarred-over glimmer of a faded mark. "The treaty is not dead," Theron said, his voice a low, calm counterpoint to their panic. "Alpha Marcus is a greedy man. He wants our trade routes more than he wants his beta's bruised pride. He will sign." "And the court?" Valerius pressed. "How do we explain this? That you have chosen a nothing to bring into the royal household?" Theron finally looked up, and the full weight of his alpha power silenced the tent. His eyes were dark, intense, and held a warning that made both seasoned advisors take an involuntary step back. "You will explain nothing," he said, the words sharp and precise. "You will simply inform them that I have found my mate. Her birth is irrelevant. Her past is irrelevant. She is mine. That is the only explanation they are owed." He was their king, and he was reminding them of that fact. He trusted his own instincts more than their political maneuvering because his instincts were what kept their kingdom safe. His wolf knew things his mind was still catching up to, and it knew, with absolute certainty, that the girl was the key to something vital. Not only that, he felt a pull to her that defied all logic, a fierce, protective urge that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with a bond he was only just beginning to understand. Without another word, he turned and swept out of the tent. Let them manage the politics. He needed to face the source of the storm herself.
The tent flap flew open with a sudden gust of wind, and then he was there. The Alpha King, Theron. His presence sucked the very air from the tent. He was bigger in here, his broad shoulders seeming to touch the silk walls, his energy a silent pressure that demanded submission. Isolde's breath hitched and a tremor ran down her spine. The regal woman's warning echoed in her ears. Do not speak. Her body moved on instinct, a reaction carved into her by years of Kyle's training. She dropped to her knees, her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the rich fur beneath her. This was what you did. You made yourself small. You made yourself nothing. You waited for the command, or the blow. The silence stretched. With every heartbeat, her terror mounted. Get up. The command was low, deep, and resonant. It wasn't a snarl, like Kale's orders. It was a statement of fact, as simple and undeniable as the rising of the moon. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she forced herself to obey, rising slowly to her feet. Still, she could not make herself look at him. She stared at his chest instead, at the dark leather of his tunic. Look at me, he commanded, his voice closer now. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her head, and her breath caught. His eyes. They weren't cruel or cold. They were dark, like a forest at midnight, and they were filled with an intensity that stripped her bare. He wasn't looking at her like she was dirt. He was looking at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. He didn't move, didn't touch her. He just watched her. Are you hurt? He asked. The question was so unexpected she couldn't answer for a moment. Hurt? Her entire life was a landscape of hurt. She didn't know how to exist without it. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. He took a step closer, and she flinched. He stopped instantly. A flicker of something, frustration, anger, crossed his face before it was gone. Why did you let him do it? He asked, his voice soft, yet it cut deeper than any of Kale's shouts. Why did you let him hurt you? The question cracked her open. No one had ever asked her that. They had only ever watched or ignored it. She didn't have an answer that would make sense to a king. How could she explain that the pain was the only proof she had that he loved her at all? Her voice trembled. I loved him. The words sounded so pathetic, so hollow, even to her own ears. She finally looked away, shame burning her cheeks. In the stillness that followed, she waited for him to mock her, to call her a fool. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "That wasn't love. That was fear." Her head snapped back up. His eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw not pity, but a grim, terrible understanding. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. His words were a chisel, chipping away at the foundation of her entire existence. A tiny spark of defiance, a thing she thought had died long ago, flickered to life inside her. This man knew nothing about her, nothing about her sacrifice. As the silence roared, she found her voice again, stronger this time. "You don't understand," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "You saved me from him tonight, but he won't stop. He's the beta. He's respected. He will see your claim as a challenge. He will hunt me." Her eyes met his, and she delivered the final, desperate truth. "And if he has to go through you to get to me, he will."
Come morning, the air in the command tent was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the impending treaty. Alpha Marcus of the Black Moon Pack sat across the heavy oak table, his face a mask of strained neutrality. But it was the wolf standing just behind his shoulder that held Theron's attention. Kyle. The beta's eyes were filled with a venom so potent, Theron could practically taste it. His earlier warning to Isolde echoed in his mind. He will hunt you. And here he was, not with claws, but with politics. Your Majesty, Alpha Marcus began, his voice trying for diplomacy but cracking under the strain. We are honored by your visit, but there is a matter of pack law we must address. Theron leaned back in his chair. His posture relaxed, but his eyes were like chips of obsidian. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked directly at Kyle. Speak then. As if that were his cue, Kyle stepped forward. He gave a shallow, mocking bow. Majesty, it is our ancient law, a law that predates even the Great Accords. A rejected wolf, one cast out by their mate, is the property of their home pack. They are to be dealt with, exiled, or worse. He let the words hang in the air, a clear and deliberate threat. The girl Isolde belongs to us. We demand her return. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. He was using the very laws Theron was sworn to uphold against him. It was a clever trap. To deny the law was to undermine his own authority. To agree was to hand Isolde over to her executioner. Theron let the silence stretch, watching Cale's smug confidence grow. He could feel his advisors, Valerius and Cassian, holding their breath beside him. They were waiting for him to navigate the political minefield. But Theron had no intention of navigating it. He was going to burn it to the ground. Your ancient law is noted, Theron said, his voice a low, dangerous purr that sent a shiver through the tent. But you seem to be mistaken about one thing, Beta. He slowly rose to his feet, his full height and power dominating the space. You believe you rejected her. The truth is, you were never her fated mate to begin with. In that moment, he made his declaration. The bond I share with her is a true fated mark. It is a law of the goddess herself, and no petty pack tradition, no ancient rule, and certainly no power on this earth, will ever supersede it. He stared Kale down, his golden wolf eyes flaring with an inner light. She is not your property. She is the future queen. And if you ever refer to her with such disrespect again, he paused, letting the threat sink in. I will personally rip the title of Beta from your throat. The air crackled with power. Kale flinched back, his smugness evaporating into pure, unadulterated shock. Alpha Marcus looked pale, terrified of the war his Beta had just started. Theron had drawn his line in the sand, and now he knew Kale would be forced to cross it.
The whispers followed her everywhere. Even in the seclusion of the king's pavilion, she could feel them slithering under the silk walls like snakes. The king's guards stood outside her tent now, a constant, silent presence. She was a prisoner, a protected, gilded prisoner, but a prisoner all the same. She paced the length of the rich fur rug, the soft blue shift he'd given her feeling like a costume for a play she didn't understand. The king had defended her. He had called her his mate, his queen. The words were so impossible, her mind couldn't hold on to them. Deep down, she knew the truth. Kale would never accept this. His pride, his rage. It was a fire that would consume everything. And she was standing at the center of it. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside the tent. Shouts, the sound of a brief struggle. Her heart leaped into her throat. Before she could move, the tent flap was ripped aside, and he was there. Kale. His eyes were wild, his face flushed with a furious madness. Two of the king's guards lay groaning on the ground behind him. Did you think they could keep you from me? He hissed, stepping inside and letting the flap fall shut, plunging them into the dim, intimate light. Her voice trembled. What are you doing? He'll kill you. He'll have to find me first, Kale sneered, advancing on her. I came for you, Isolde. I was wrong. The pressure, the politics. I made a mistake. Come back with me. We can run. We can leave all this behind. The words were poison, wrapped in honey. He was trying to sound sincere, but his eyes held the same cold, possessive light they always did. It was a trick, another one of his games. "No," she whispered, backing away until her legs hit the soft edge of the bed. His face twisted. The mask of the repentant lover fell away, revealing the monster beneath. "No?" he snarled. "You don't say no to me. You think this king wants you? You're a temporary amusement, a political statement. When he is done with you, he will throw you away, and you will have nothing." He lunged, grabbing her arm. His touch was just as she remembered, cold, cruel, and bruising. The familiar terror washed over her, a paralyzing wave that threatened to drown her. Her body wanted to go limp, to submit, to endure until it was over. That's what she always did. But then, the king's words echoed in her mind. That wasn't love. That was fear. As Cale's grip tightened, and he leaned in to whisper his final venomous claim, "You belong to me. You will always be mine." Something inside her broke, not her spirit, her chains, a defiant, guttural "no" ripped from her throat. It wasn't just a word, it was a roar. And as the sound left her lips, something erupted from her core. It wasn't fire, it wasn't lightning. It was a wave of pure, invisible force, a concussive blast of raw power. It slammed into Cale, throwing him backward as if he'd been struck by a giant's fist. He flew across the tent and crashed into the map table, scattering scrolls and wooden figures everywhere. Isolde stared, her hand outstretched, trembling. She had done that. The power, a humming, electric thing, still buzzed beneath her skin. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a ghost. She was something else entirely. Cale scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of utter shock and a new, deeper terror. He stared at her, not with anger, but with horrified awe. What are you?" he breathed, stumbling backward toward the exit.
Theron was walking from his command tent when he heard the shouts. His blood went cold. Her scent, lavender and a unique wild fragrance that was hers alone, was laced with the sharp, bitter tang of fear. His wolf surged forward. He didn't run. He moved like a shadow, a blur of speed and purpose that sent his guard scrambling to keep up. He ripped the flap of her tent aside just in time to see Kyle scrambling out, his face pale with a terror Theron had never seen on the arrogant beta before. But Theron's attention wasn't on him. It was on Isolde. She was standing in the middle of the tent, her hand still outstretched, her body trembling. But her eyes were wide with a shocked, dawning power. The very air around her seemed to hum, to crackle with a latent energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. His wolf recognized it instantly. This was it. This was the power he had sensed. "She's a witch!" Kyle yelled, pointing a shaking finger at her from a safe distance. "A monster! She attacked me with dark magic!" Theron slowly turned his head, his gaze falling upon Cale with the weight of an avalanche. He completely ignored the accusation. It was a pathetic lie from a terrified man. All that mattered was the scene in front of him, the overturned table, the fear on Kyle's face, and the defiant, terrified power radiating from Isolde. His belief in her wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a fact. "Guards." Theron's voice was deceptively soft, a low rumble that promised death. "Take this thing out of my sight. If he speaks her name again or takes a single step in this direction without my express permission, you have my leave to end him." The guards, seeing the lethal fury in their king's eyes, didn't hesitate. They seized the sputtering beta and dragged him away. The moment they were gone, Theron let the tent flap fall, sealing the two of them inside. The air was still humming, still vibrating with the aftershock of what she had done. He looked at her, standing there in the middle of the chaos she had created, a girl who had just discovered she was a force of nature. Her fear was still there, but beneath it was a new, wild strength. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his life had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more important. He took a slow step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Isolde," he said, his voice low and urgent, laced with a wonder he couldn't hide. "Don't be afraid." He paused, the space between them burning with unspoken questions. "We need to talk."
His words, "we need to talk," hung in the buzzing air between them, more potent than any threat. The tent was a disaster, a testament to the strange, terrifying power that had erupted from her. Kale's scent of fear still lingered. But then, as she looked at Theron, she realized what was truly different. He wasn't looking at her like she was a monster. He was looking at her like he had just found the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. In the quiet that followed, she finally found her voice. What am I?" she whispered, the question laced with a terror so deep it ached in her bones. "Am I a witch? A monster?" Without another word, Theron closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a warm, solid wall against the chaos threatening to consume her. "No," he said, his voice a low, certain rumble. "You are not a monster." He held her gaze, and in that moment she saw the absolute truth in his eyes. Your bond with Kale, and it was a lie, a cruel imitation, a possessive brand born of his fear. He felt your power even when you didn't, and because of that, he tried to crush it. He tried to punish you into becoming small because he was terrified of what you would become. Her thoughts spun. Kale, afraid of her? It didn't make sense. And yet, deep down, she knew the truth. She remembered the strange panic in his eyes, the desperation to keep her hidden. It wasn't about his rank. It was about her. "What you and I have," Theron continued, his voice dropping, becoming more intimate, "is a true fated mark. It is rare, ancient, a bond of equals. And the power you just felt, it is a part of that bond. It is a part of you. It is not dark magic. It is your fire, Isolde. And you have been trying to survive a winter your entire life, not knowing you had a furnace inside of you." He was offering her an escape, not just from a tent, but from the prison she'd been living in her whole life. Yet to accept it meant trusting him. Another alpha. Another powerful male who could crush her just as easily as Kale had. Her instincts surged, screaming at her to run, to hide. But then she looked at his eyes. They weren't possessive. They were reverent. He wasn't afraid of her fire. He wanted to see it burn. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. Her fear didn't vanish, but for the first time, it was smaller than her hope. She was done being a ghost. She was done being a victim. This man, this king, was offering her a chance to become something else. And she was going to take it. The tension broke. She took a shuddering breath, her decision settling in her soul. "Okay," she whispered, the word feeling bigger than any she had ever spoken. She finally met his intense gaze, her own eyes clear and resolute. "What do I do?"
Her question, "What do I do?" was the most beautiful sound Theron had ever heard. It was the sound of a queen taking her first breath. It was the sound of his world finally, irrevocably, aligning. He had gambled his reputation, his treaty, and the stability of his court on an instinct. And he had just been proven right. More importantly, she had chosen to trust him, and he would not fail her. "First," he said, a slow, genuine smile touching his lips for the first time, "you will stand by my side. Not behind me, not as a secret. At my side, where you belong." Without waiting for a response, he offered her his arm. After a beat of hesitation, she took it. Her fingers were trembling, but her grip was firm. As soon as she touched him, the bond pulsed, a warm, living thing that flowed between them. He felt her fear, yes, but he also felt her fierce, newfound resolve. What followed was a walk that changed everything. He led her from the quiet intimacy of her pavilion to the heart of his power, the main royal tent where his inner circle was gathered. Valerius and Cassian were there, along with a handful of his most trusted generals and nobles. The moment they entered, a shocked silence fell over the assembly. Every eye landed on Isolde, on her hand resting on his arm. He saw their faces, the skepticism, the disapproval, the confusion. He let them stare, let them whisper. "Your Majesty," Valerius started, his voice strained. "Is this wise?" Theron didn't answer him. Instead, he led Isolde to the head of the great map table, to the empty chair that sat beside his own throne-like seat. "From this moment forward," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument, "you will no longer refer to her as the girl. You will not speak of her as my claimed. She has a name. It is Isolde, and you will address her as you would address me, as your queen." The declaration landed like a physical blow. This was no longer an impulse. This was a decree. He was forcing them to choose a side. But then, a new voice, sharp and laced with aristocratic ice, cut through the tension. "A queen?" Theron's gaze snapped to the speaker. Lady Seraphina, a noblewoman from an allied territory, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper political ambitions. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, raked over Isolde with undisguised contempt. "A queen of what precisely?" Seraphina asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "A queen of shadows? Of back alleys and whispered rumors? A crown doesn't wash away a low-born's dirt, Your Majesty. It only makes it glitter." The insult was a direct challenge, not just to Isolde, but to him. He could feel Isolde flinch beside him, could feel her new courage wavering under the venomous attack. His wolf rose, a growl building in his chest. He was about to put Seraphina in her place so firmly she would never speak again. But then, he felt something else through the bond. Isolde's fear was still there, but something new was rising to meet it. A slow, cold, and utterly furious fire.
The woman's words were like stones, each one meant to bruise, to break. Lowborn, dirt, stray. They were the same words Kale had used, the same poison she had been forced to drink for years. And her first instinct was to shrink, to look at the floor, to become the ghost everyone believed her to be. Her pulse raced. She could feel the stares of everyone in the tent, waiting for her to crumble. She could feel Theron's protective rage building beside her, a storm ready to break on her behalf. But then, the fire Theron had spoken of, the furnace inside her, it ignited. It wasn't a wild eruption like the one with Kyle. It was a cold, sharp, and focused flame. As the silence stretched, she looked at Lady Seraphina, truly looked at her for the first time. The woman was beautiful, poised, her silver hair like a crown of ice. She was everything Isolde wasn't. But as her wolf stirred, as the bond pulsed with Theron's silent support, she noticed something. A tiny, almost invisible tremor in Seraphina's perfectly manicured hand. A faint, sour scent of anxiety cutting through her expensive perfume. In the span of a breath, something shifted inside her. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a political strategy. All she had was a lifetime of observing predators, and an instinct that was suddenly screaming at her. She let go of Theron's arm. She took one step forward, and she met the noblewoman's icy gaze without flinching. "You speak of dirt, Lady Seraphina," Isolde said, her voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent tent. It wasn't the trembling whisper of a victim. It was the calm, measured tone of a survivor. "But I have learned that dirt can be washed away. Some stains, they go all the way to the bone." She took another step, her eyes never leaving Seraphina's. The woman's composure wavered, a flicker of uncertainty in her cold eyes. "Tell me," Isolde continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "You seem to know so much about my old pack, about Beta Kale." A beat later, she delivered the killing blow, a guess born of pure, fiery instinct. Does your alpha know how often you've been secretly meeting with his envoys? Does he know about the promises you have been making them behind his back? As the truth unraveled, the blood drained from Seraphina's face. Her mask of aristocratic disdain shattered, replaced by raw, naked panic. She had been caught. The entire tent could see it. Isolde had just drawn blood. Without another word, Seraphina turned, her movements stiff with fury and humiliation, and stormed from the tent. A stunned silence remained in her wake. Isolde stood alone in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of her own victory. She had done it. She hadn't hidden. She hadn't endured. She had fought back. And as she turned to meet Theron's gaze, she saw not just pride in his eyes. She saw awe. She was no longer just his fated mate. In that moment, she had truly become his queen. But she knew, as she felt the lingering hatred from Seraphina's retreat, that she had just traded one enemy for another, far more dangerous one.
The night was deceptively calm. A cool breeze whispered through the command tent, carrying the scent of pine and distant campfires. Theron stood over the map table, not looking at troop placements, but at the sprawling territories of the north. His territories. And soon, hers. He traced a line along a river with his finger, a slow smile touching his lips. Since Isolde's stand against Seraphina, a new energy had taken hold of the camp. His people saw her strength now. They saw what he saw. He felt a deep, profound sense of rightness. For the first time in years, the crown on his head didn't feel like a weight of stone. It felt like something he could finally share. But then, the night screamed. It started with a single panicked shout from the western perimeter. Without warning, a war horn blared, not a challenge, but an alarm. His head snapped up, his every instinct roaring to life. In the span of a breath, chaos erupted. The sounds of fighting, the clang of steel, the furious snarls of wolves crashed through the camp. Valerius burst into the tent, his face pale, his sword already drawn. Ambush, Majesty, we're under attack from the west and the north. The lines are breaking. Theron's mind was already moving, processing the impossible. An attack this coordinated, this precise. It wasn't a raid. It was a planned invasion. It was a betrayal. Because of that, he knew this wasn't an outside force. This was an inside job. He strode out into the night, his guards forming a protective circle around him. The scene was pure carnage. Black Moon pack warriors, men he had been negotiating with hours ago, were tearing through his encampment, fighting alongside a contingent of wolves bearing the silver crest of Lady Seraphina. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Kale and Seraphina. Revenge and ambition. A perfect deadly storm. What's worse, they weren't just fighting. They were shouting a single venomous refrain. Death to the witch, down with the false king. They had turned her power into a weapon against him. A reason. A justification for their treason. His fury was a physical force, a low growl ripping from his chest. He drew his own greatsword, the silver gleaming in the firelight. He would crush this pathetic rebellion. He would tear Kale limb from limb. He would make them all pay for their treachery. He was a blur of motion, a tempest of fury and steel, cutting down rebels with a king's righteous rage. He fought not just for his throne, but for her honor, for her safety, for their future. But as the chaos swirled around him, a cold, sickening dread began to crawl up his spine. This was too direct, too loud, a feint. Kyle wasn't a fool. His goal wasn't a direct assault. Deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't a battle for the throne. It was a diversion. His head snapped toward the royal pavilions, toward the one tent that glowed with a soft, warm light. Her tent. Isolde! The name was a roar of pure terror. He shoved Valerius aside, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. He began to run, his powerful legs eating up the ground, the sounds of battle fading behind him. He had been so focused on the war, he had left her exposed, and he knew with a certainty that froze his soul that he was already too late.
The sounds of battle were a distant storm at first, something she heard but didn't understand. She was in her tent, tracing the lines on one of Theron's maps, finally feeling like she had a place in his world. He had left her with two of his most trusted guards, promising to return soon. She had felt a flicker of real hope, a warmth that had nothing to do with the brazier in the corner. Then the storm broke upon her. The shouts grew closer, turning from a dull roar to sharp, panicked cries. The ground trembled. Her guards drew their swords, their faces grim, and stood on either side of the tent flap. "Stay back, my queen," one of them commanded. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Before she could even ask what was happening, the tent wall behind her was sliced open. A long, vertical gash ripped in the silk. Men poured in. They weren't Theron's men. They wore the black and gray of her old pack. Her guards moved to intercept them, a flurry of steel and snarls. She scrambled back, her newfound instincts screaming at her. A surge of power, that wild, humming fire, rose in her chest. She thrust her hands out, and a wave of force slammed into the first attacker, sending him flying. But they were ready for her. The next wolf who came at her wasn't armed with a sword. He held a thick, heavy chain woven with silver. He threw it like a net. The moment the metal touched her skin, her power vanished. It didn't just fade, it was snuffed out like a candle, leaving behind a cold, sickening emptiness and a searing, burning pain. She cried out, stumbling to her knees, her strength gone. And then he stepped through the gash in the tent, his face illuminated by the fires of the battle outside. Cale. His eyes were burning with a terrifying, obsessive light. He wasn't looking at her with anger anymore. It was worse. He was looking at her like an object he had lost and finally reclaimed. "Did you miss me?" he whispered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He watched as his men finished off her guards, a brutal, merciless efficiency to their work. The scent of blood filled the air. Her stomach churned. "Time to come home, little ghost," he said. Without another word, one of his men threw a thick black hood over her head, plunging her into suffocating darkness. Rough hands grabbed her, binding her wrists. She was dragged out of the tent, her feet stumbling on the chaotic ground. She was a prize, a spoil of war, and her new life, her new hope, was being extinguished with every step she took back into the darkness. Her next conscious thought was of the cold. It seeped into her bones, a damp, unrelenting chill that felt horribly familiar. The hood was ripped from her head, and for a moment, the dim torchlight blinded her. As her eyes adjusted, the world resolved into her worst nightmare. She was in a cell, not a room, a cage. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture. The floor was packed earth, and the air smelled of mildew and despair. It smelled like the hidden places of her old life. In the stillness that followed, heavy chains were locked around her wrists, the silver in them a constant agonizing burn against her skin, a poison that kept her power caged. She was back where she started. No. She was lower. Before, she'd had the illusion of love to keep her warm. Now, she had nothing. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and he entered. Cale. He didn't look like a warrior fresh from battle. He looked like a king who had just won his crown. He circled her slowly, like a wolf inspecting its trapped prey. "It's a shame, really," he said, his voice a low, conversational murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. "You were almost impressive back there. For a moment. This queen persona. But we both know the truth, don't we?" She didn't answer. She just stared at the wall, her spirit a hollow, aching void. He stopped in front of her, crouching down so their faces were level. His eyes were dark pits of triumphant madness. "Did you really think he loved you? A king? Theron the Great? For you?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. You were a symbol, Isolde, a weapon to use against my alpha, a way to look noble. He was using you, and when he was done, he would have discarded you like trash. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, shattering the fragile hope she had so carefully built. And that power, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. That's not a gift. It's a curse. It's the reason you'll always be an outcast. It's the reason no one can ever truly love you. It's why you'll always be alone. He reached out, his thumb stroking her cheek in a gesture of grotesque tenderness. She flinched away. Except for me, he finished. I'm the only one who has ever seen you for what you truly are. A broken thing, a creature built for pain. You are nothing without me. He will not come for you. His rebellion is crushed. His kingdom is in chaos. He will forget you ever existed. He stood up, his victory complete. He had taken everything from her, not just her freedom, her hope, her belief in herself. He had taken the fire and left only ashes. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Welcome home, he said, before shutting the door and plunging her back into darkness. And in the cold, suffocating silence, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, she finally believed him. All was lost. She was nothing, and no one was coming to save her. Darkness and cold. For a while, that was all there was. Kale's words echoed in the suffocating silence, a poison seeping into the cracks of her broken heart. A broken thing. A creature built for pain. He will forget you. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? His cruelty had been the only constant in her life. This cell was her truth. The pain was her reality. Her breath hitched in a sob, a small, hopeless sound swallowed by the gloom. She was nothing. But then, a different voice whispered through the corridors of her memory. A voice that wasn't a whip, but a shield. Theron. That wasn't love. That was fear. Fear. The word was a spark in the endless dark. As if a key turned in a rusty lock, her mind began to work, to piece things together. Kale's strange, panicked anger whenever the Alpha was mentioned. His terror the night her power first flared in the tent. His obsession with keeping her small, silent, and secret. He said he was the only one who saw her for what she truly was. And in a single, silent explosion of clarity, she realized he was right. He had seen her. He'd seen the power coiled inside her, the faded mark she never knew she carried. He'd seen the queen sleeping inside the ghost, and it had terrified him. As the truth unraveled, the cold in her veins began to recede, replaced by a slow, rising heat. He hadn't been punishing her for loving him. He had been punishing her for what she was. Her suffering wasn't the price of his affection. It was the cage he built to contain his own terror. All his talk of protecting his rank, of her being a weakness. It was all a lie. She had been the one with the power all along. The chains around her wrists, the silver that burned and kept her magic dormant, suddenly felt different. They weren't a symbol of her weakness anymore. They were proof of his fear. In the quiet that followed, something new settled in her soul. It wasn't the wild, uncontrolled fire from before. It was a cold, hard, and deliberate flame. The despair was gone, burned away. In its place was a resolve as solid as the stone walls around her. Her suffering was not her identity. It was her fuel. The bond, the true faded mark she shared with Theron, pulsed faintly, a distant star in her inner darkness. A promise. He would come. And when he did, she would be ready.
The aftermath of the first assault was a field of blood and chaos. Theron stood in the wreckage of his command tent, his greatsword dripping with the blood of traitors. They had pushed the rebels back, cornering them in the Black Moon Pack's old, fortified settlement, but it was a hollow victory, because they had her. "We lay siege," Valerius urged, his face grim, a bloody bandage wrapped around his arm. "We have them surrounded. We can starve them out. It's the strategically sound move, Majesty. Theron slammed his fist onto the splintered map table, his control finally cracking. Strategically sound? He roared, his voice a low, terrifying growl that made his seasoned general flinch. You want to talk about strategy while he has her in that fortress? While he fills her head with poison and breaks her spirit? He paced the tent, his wolf clawing at the inside of his skin, desperate to run, to hunt, to tear their enemies apart. He could feel her through the bond. The connection was weak, strained by the distance and whatever silver they had her bound in, but it was there, and what he felt terrified him. He felt the dregs of her despair, the echo of her all is lost moment. We lay siege, and Kyle has days to hurt her. Theron snarled, his eyes blazing with a golden fire. We starve them out, and he has weeks to kill her. I will not give him that time. I will not let him break her. His voice dropped, thick with a pain that was more profound than any physical wound. I can feel her. Her hope is fading. We are out of time. He stopped pacing, his decision made. His entire life, he had been a king first and a wolf second. Not anymore. Gather the sentinels, he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. His sentinels were his best, 10 of the deadliest warriors in his kingdom, loyal to him and him alone. We are not laying siege. We are cutting the head off the snake. Cassian stepped forward, his face pale. Your Majesty, a direct assault is suicide. You cannot risk yourself. Let us lead it. I am not risking myself. Theron cut him off, his gaze as hard as steel. I am going to get my queen. Ready the assault team. We breach the west wall under the cover of the moon's apex. His eyes met Valerius's. You will command the main force. Create a diversion at the eastern gate. Make it loud. Without another word, he turned and began strapping on his battle armor. Every piece he buckled into place was a promise. Every leather strap he tightened was a vow. He was no longer just a king fighting a war. He was a mate, coming to reclaim the other half of his soul, and he would tear down the world to get to her.
She didn't know how much time had passed. Hours? A day? Time was a meaningless river in the darkness of the cell. But she was no longer drowning in it. She was waiting, listening. Then she heard it. Faint at first, a distant rumble like thunder. Then it grew louder, the sounds of battle. A war horn, not the panicked alarm from before, but a deep, resonant call to arms. Theron's horn. Hope, fierce and sharp, pierced through her. He was here. The stone floor beneath her began to vibrate with the shockwaves of the fight. Shouts, screams, the clash of steel. It was the sound of her rescue. The heavy bar on her cell door was slammed back. The door flew open, and Kyle stood there, silhouetted against the flickering torchlight of the corridor. His face was no longer calm and victorious. It was a mask of wild, cornered fury. His hair was matted with sweat and blood. He was losing. He came for you. He hissed, the words filled with a venomous disbelief. The fool is going to die for you. He strode into the cell, a long, wicked-looking dagger in his hand. But he won't get you. If I can't have you, no one will. He lunged, her name a curse on his lips. The old Isolde would have screamed. She would have cowered. She would have accepted her fate. But the old Isolde was dead. As if the forest watched, as her wolf pressed forward, she met his lunge not with fear, but with fire. She threw her chained hands up, catching his dagger-wielding wrist. His momentum carried him forward, and they slammed against the cold stone wall. He was stronger, but she was faster, filled with a desperate, burning energy. "You are nothing!" he snarled, trying to force the dagger down toward her throat. "You are a coward!" she screamed back, the words tearing from her with all the pain and rage she had held inside for years. With a final guttural cry, she focused every ounce of her will, every spark of her power, on the silver chains that bound her. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. A blinding, white-hot light erupted from her wrists. The silver didn't just break, it vaporized with a deafening crack, searing her skin but freeing her magic. The backlash of power threw Kale back. He stumbled, his eyes wide with shock. She was free. Her hands were burned, her body ached, but her power was roaring through her veins like a river breaking through a dam. She rose to her feet, her own growl rising in her throat. And just as she prepared to meet his next attack, the stone wall to her left exploded inward. Dust and rock filled the air, and through the newly made opening, a figure stepped into the cell, his great sword in hand, his golden eyes blazing with the fire of 1,000 suns. Theron. The moment their eyes locked, the battle outside, the cell, and Kale himself all faded away. The bond between them flared to life, a searing, undeniable truth. He was here. He had come for her. And the final battle was about to begin.
Time stood still. For the span of a single silent heartbeat, the world was a frozen portrait, the dust-choked cell, the woman whose soul was a roaring fire, and the pathetic, cornered wolf who had tried to snuff it out. Kyle recovered first, a snarl ripping from his throat. He didn't see a fated mate or a future queen. He saw the witch who had defied him and the rival who had stolen her. His madness gave him speed. He lunged, not at Isolde, but at Theron. It was a desperate, suicidal charge. Steel screamed against steel. The cell, already a cage, became a death arena. Theron was stronger, more skilled, but Kale fought with the feral abandon of a male who had nothing left to lose. He was a whirlwind of rage and flashing steel, his only goal to drag Theron down into the abyss with him. A parry, a lunge, a desperate block that sent sparks flying into the gloom. Theron pressed his advantage, his greatsword a blur, forcing Kale back toward the broken wall. He saw the opening, the fatal flaw in Kale's wild defense. He drove his shoulder into the beta's chest, slamming him against the jagged stone, and brought his sword up for the final, killing blow. But then Kale did the unexpected. He dropped his dagger, and in the same motion his hand shot out, grabbing a shard of sharp, heavy rock from the rubble. He drove it up, under Theron's guard, burying it deep in his side. A roar of pure, agonizing pain ripped from Theron's throat. His vision flared white. The strength in his arms faltered, his sword dipping for a critical second. It was all the time Kale needed. The beta's dagger was back in his hand, arcing toward Theron's exposed throat. He was going to die.
Her world narrowed to that single, horrifying moment. The scent of Theron's blood, rich, vital, and hers, filled the air. The man who had seen her, the man who had called her a queen, was about to die. No. Her body moved on instinct. A scream tore from her lips, a sound of pure primal rage. "Get away from him!" Without thinking, she threw her hands forward. But this time, she didn't just push. She pulled. She reached for the bond between them, for the fire in her own soul, and poured all of her love, all of her fury, all of her will into a single desperate act of protection. What erupted from her was not a wave of force. It was a torrent of pure white gold light. It didn't strike Theron. It wrapped around him, a shield of blinding energy. And where her power touched his, something new flared to life. On Theron's chest, right over his heart, a mark began to burn. A glowing, intricate symbol, a crescent moon cradling a blazing star, etched itself onto his skin in lines of fire. The true fated mark. As if fate demanded it, the mark pulsed with a blinding light. Kyle, his dagger inches from its target, cried out as the holy fire seared his skin. He was thrown backward, not by a physical force, but by a divine one. He landed in a heap, his eyes wide with a final, soul-shattering understanding. The prophecy his pack had whispered about for generations. The one about a beta who would mistake a queen for a commoner and lose everything. It was real, and it was about him. His betrayal had not destroyed her. It had revealed her. In that moment of stunned horror, Theron, his own eyes wide with awe as he stared at the glowing brand on his own chest, found his strength. He surged forward. There was no rage left in him, only a cold, swift justice. The sound of his sword was the last thing Cale ever heard. In the quiet that followed, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Cale lay still, his reign of terror finally over. The glowing mark on Theron's chest slowly faded, leaving behind a faint, silvery pattern, like a new scar of destiny. The battle was over. The war was won. Her strength gave out. She collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with the aftershock of the power she had unleashed. The burns on her wrists were a searing, agonizing pain. A moment later, he was there. Theron. He knelt in front of her, ignoring his own grievous wound. He didn't say a word. He just reached out, his hands gentle, and took her burned wrists in his. His touch was warm and steady. Isolde. Her name hung in the air, a prayer. Her breath caught. Tears she hadn't known she was holding back began to fall, tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. He had come for her. He had almost died for her. The space between them burned, not with fear or power, but with a tenderness so profound it ached. He gently brushed the tears from her face with his thumb. His eyes. They weren't the eyes of a king looking at a subject. They were the eyes of a man looking at the other half of his soul. "I saw it," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "The mark. On me. It was from you." She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against her forehead in a touch that was infinitely more intimate than any kiss. "My queen," he whispered, not as a title, but as a vow. "My brave, fierce queen." The tension that had lived in her shoulders for a lifetime finally began to dissolve. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. In the heart of her greatest nightmare, surrounded by dust and death, she had never felt more alive, and she had never, ever felt so safe. Weeks later, she stood not in a cell, but in the great hall of the Alpha King's citadel. The air wasn't cold and damp. It was warm, filled with the light streaming through high, arched windows. She wore no chains, only a simple, elegant gown of deep blue silk. The nobles and alphas of the United Packs were assembled before her, their faces turned up to the royal dais. They were no longer whispering. They were listening. She held a newly penned scroll in her hands, her burns now faded into silvery scars, a permanent reminder of her victory. Theron stood beside her, not in front of her. He was her silent, unwavering support, his presence a warm weight at her side. Her voice, clear and steady, rang through the hall. "I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as a survivor," she began, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "And I have learned that the oldest laws are not always the wisest. Sometimes they are just the oldest cages." She unrolled the scroll. "Today, with the full authority of my king and my own fated right, I propose the first of our new laws." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The status of rejected is hereby abolished. No wolf can be declared property. No pack member can be cast out without a trial by a council of peers. We will build a law to protect the voiceless, a law to shelter the broken, a law to ensure that no wolf is ever again made to feel like a ghost in their own home, because our strength as a people is not measured by the power of our alphas, but by how we care for our most vulnerable." A stunned silence fell over the hall, and then it was broken. Valerius, the king's stern advisor, was the first to kneel, then Cassian, then, one by one, the other alphas and nobles sank to one knee. It wasn't a gesture of submission. It was a pledge of allegiance. To her. That night, as the moon rose high in the sky, she stood with Theron on a high balcony overlooking the sleeping kingdom. Their kingdom. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. The silvery mark over his heart pulsed with a soft, warm light, a light only she could see. "The queen who rewrote pack law," he murmured into her hair. "They are already telling your story." She leaned back into him, a real, genuine smile gracing her lips. "That story is over," she said softly. He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes filled with a love so deep it was a universe unto itself. "No, my love," he whispered, his lips finding hers. "This is just the beginning of ours." And as he kissed her, she knew, with every fiber of her being, that he was right.